we felt like local news was in trouble before broadly the general public realized that it was in trouble or began to realize that it was in trouble.
Welcome to another episode of the AI as Your Teammate podcast. I'm here with a very good friend, so we're mostly just going to be hanging out today. Jay Allred, President and CEO of Source Media Group, Chairman of the IdeaWorks Foundation, CEO of Lead AI, a company that he has built with me. And we're going to talk about AI. Jay is super early to the AI space, especially AI and media. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks a lot, Evan. I'm glad to be here.
So first question for you. Let's go way, way, way back to the point where I had a full head of hair.
I didn't, but it's been a long time.
You were closer. You were super early into the AI game. And I think you were super early into a couple of games at the same time. The first was AI. The second was that media, for all intents and purposes, especially print media, was a disaster. So take me back a little bit to the 2016, 2017 timeframe. What were the signals that you were seeing? What was the noise that you were seeing? This and before ChatGPT, before the infrastructure for ChatGPT, what was going on in your world? Why were you so interested in it?
So we started Source Media back in 2013, and it was just kind of on the principle that local news was in trouble before the general public realized it was in trouble. We thought that it was in trouble. We felt like online, in whatever form that was going to take, was going to overtake print as a dominant consumption vehicle. And so our thinking, I say that story to say that we started an online only local media company in 2013 to just kind of set the stage about the way that our brains worked from an organizational perspective. We were interested in the future and trying to be ready for we weren't so arrogant to think we could tell the future, or know it, but we had and so our first hunch was people were going to consume content broadly, generationally, more and more online, probably more and more on their phones. But the need for local journalism wasn't going to, and it certainly wasn't going to, the need for good, reliable journalism was going to continue to be there. It was just the vehicle that people consumed it on or the way that we produced it was going to have to change. I got started to be interested in automation and AI for news production and assistance. I think it might have been even earlier than that. It might have been 2015. I was at South by Southwest. I was at a sparsely attended panel session with 4 people, I think 2 of which I can't remember. One was from the AP and the other one was from an organization called Naturally Speaking, I think, or Narrative Science, one of the two. The moment that really struck me was that in these very little tiny pockets of journalism, people were experimenting with looking at large data sets that were reliable and consistent and saying, how might we automate this so that we can produce more stories that readers want, but we don't have to try to have this devil's bargain of huge payrolls or decreasing payrolls and increasing information needs. And so the AP had done this with reports, which is super simple. And I just remember listening to them talk and just thinking, we need to start to think about this right now, because what's happening there is a real opportunity for local newsrooms to increase their value proposition to their audiences while living in the reality that the business model is rapidly being disrupted and no one's going to know exactly what's going to happen. But if at the end of the day, if you're not valuable to your audience, you're not going to be there for very long.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in because I think one of the things that's just hilarious, to me anyway, sitting here in 2024. So you're in 2013 and you're, Nobody's going to read the physical paper anymore. And the fact that that could have been controversial is hysterical. Like, especially as a younger person, I was sitting there looking at Twitter, getting my news from Twitter, getting made
Sure.
fun of for getting my news from Twitter, thinking, of
Yeah.
course, all this stuff is going to go digital. And yet, in the media space, not only was it not digital, but it was almost controversial to go there.
Yeah. I mean, I think the speed at which innovation moves is largely related to the openness of the people that control the organizations that are either innovating or being disrupted, right? I mean, if you have this stake in the game that your whole profit engine is rooted in the printing and distribution of paper newspapers and the advertising that goes along with that, it's easy for me to say, well, why didn't they all just change? Well, there were strong incentives in 2013 to not just change, because to do so would be to sort of cause yourself as an executive or as a company immense pain and facing an uncertain future. And generally, that's just not how people operate. We had the benefit of saying, we're going to start this thing and we don't have to deal with the legacy of having printed for 100 years. And so we were free to sort of run toward the future because we didn't have a past. And I think that happens in every industry, right? Look at the automobile industry. Elon Musk is a controversial figure for lots of different reasons, and some of which, in my opinion, are well-grounded and some of which are a little overblown. But the reality was he started Tesla and he's never built an internal combustion engine. There was never a factory to retrofit or change over. It was just like, I'm going to build electric cars. I'm going to make ships that land themselves. He just didn't have the baggage of a history. And there's a lot of freedom to, that's why I think people go into startups because they don't actually have to create organizational change. The organizational change is just starting the thing. But yeah, it does seem to look back in 2013 and think that this was even controversial or weird at all. The other thing that we thought when we started The Source in 2013 was that the local news business ecosystem couldn't possibly get any worse. And the reality was the business of local news has only gotten worse in the last 10 years. I mean, the business of local news has only gotten worse since the day that we started when we thought it couldn't possibly get any worse. But what has happened, and this is like the normal disruption curves, is that the existing legacy business model has only continued to get worse, but the ecosystem of innovators has only grown. We started, there were probably, 75 local news sites of any ambition in the country. There's now 100, nearing 1,000. So there's innovation and entrepreneurialism happening all over the space, but you got to get a little bit of elevation over it and kind of look back over the benefit of years to sort of see the movement, because it all seems like it's operating very slowly in the moment.
Yeah, in software, there's this saying that is that we did this not because it's easy, but because we thought it would be. And that's what it sounds like. It's like, we did this not because we thought it couldn't get any worse. And then here comes 10 more years of pain.
Yeah, right. And so you end up in a position where, being early is oftentimes very difficult. I mean, you don't have the benefit of a hype cycle. You are out there, you're out there grinding away when no one wants to take the meeting. No one wants to really talk to, what are you talking about? We've faced that in pretty much all of the different organizations that we've started over the last decade. They're all still going, which is, I think, a notable achievement. But when you're early to something, you face a lot of resistance. The organizational immune systems kick in, and you're talking to legacy organizations about choosing to disrupt themselves, and that is usually not an easy conversation.
Right. And I guess, one of the things that I always thought was really impressive was that you had an organization that was overwhelmingly willing to change. The thing
Yep.
that I remember so crystal clearly was when your team asked, could we just have an AI listen to the school board meeting and transcribe it for us? If we
Mhm.
could, that would save us 8 hours a month. And then people just did it. It was like 2 weeks later, people were doing it. Working with so many news organizations, that doesn't happen. Even today, a lot of people
Mhm.
are still resistant to having the AI listen. And this was back in like 2018.
Mhm.
But I guess part of it was the tailwind of
Yeah.
building the pirate ship from the beginning.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there is some street cred that goes into organizations that have been there early, right? You have to continue to be there. You can't live off that. But there's also, I think you hit on something that's interesting, that's important for any organizational leader, whether it's me or you or the people that listen to this podcast, is you have to create, I think the thing that we worked really hard at from the very beginning because we knew that we were going to be disrupting ourselves all the time and we were going to be facing change within the industry that we were in, was we created a culture where it was safe for people to try things and not for them not to work. It was not a career ender that had an idea, you pushed it through, you got a little bit of a funding for it, you ran a test and the test failed. We just created a place and a space for especially our staff to be able to go like, all right, well, let's give this thing a shot and figure out what happens. The last decade is littered with the bodies and carcasses of ideas that we've tried and failed and left on the side of the road. I mean, it's a long list. But the stuff that has stuck has been really interesting to watch. Like you alluded to, is there a way for me to not have to transcribe these notes by hand? Our team was super early to tools like Otter and Temi and Trent, experimenting all of the time with trying to find the best transcription tools that would allow them to have the most accurate transcription and save them the most time. They still take notes, but it's this idea of, my God, I don't want to spend 3 hours listening to, an audio recording and trying to find the quote from the person. They were just really early to that. And they just kept rolling in this way of thinking about like, what's the best deployment for this? And I think that that's the thing that AI and automation are in right now in general, with business in general, is that and I think that's honestly the value that Teammate AI provides, is you were early to this too. You were right there along with us developing these automation tools long before ChatGPT was ever a thing. There wasn't a word for it, or if there was a word for it, no one understood what the word was and their eyes glazed over when you talked to them about it. But you guys were right in there with us trying to figure out ways to practically use these things. The challenge for business leaders now is AI is approaching a peak hype cycle, if it's not already there. If I have to see one more ChatGPT wrapper for recipe creation or whatever, I'm going to lose my mind. And I think like business leaders need to be aware of that, right? Like not every tool is actually a tool. Not everybody that tells you that they're going to change your life is actually going to change your life. You have to be very careful and thoughtful about what deployment looks like. But you and I have talked about this a lot, and we talk about this a ton with our clients, is that, look, the development of these tools is inevitable. They will be developed. The question or thing that you control is deployment. How are you going to deploy this? With what intention? In what way? How will your staff be involved? In what way will you get buy-in? How will you disclose this to your clients if it's important that you do that? How do you ensure accuracy? How important is that? Can it be close? If you like creatives are really worried about AI with good reason. I mean, have you seen what Sora can do? Like, have you looked at some of the stuff if I were a mid-market, not very good creative, I'd be worried right now and I'd have good reason to be. So the question is, like, if you employ those kinds of people, how do you get them to think of this as a tool that makes them better? And I think that creating a culture where they can try this and fail, or try this and know that their job isn't on the line, that's the place where That's the challengers managers are going to face.
Yes, there's a lot I want to touch on, but the first thing is that in creating that culture, I think one of the kind of stringing together a couple of things that you said. The first is that your newsroom is littered. It's a graveyard of like failed experiments and that nobody lost their job over. But
Hmm.
then second of all, you've got a whole newsroom full of people that are writing stuff all the time. And yet
Yeah.
ChatGPT hasn't taken a single job. You've got a whole media company, and yet the AI for marketing hasn't taken a single job. I mean, I'm of the belief that a lot of these AI tools that are going to like take out the creative industry are really just going to hurt Upwork because
Mhm.
they're going to take these middle of the road to bad graphic designers and they're going to make everything good enough,
Yeah.
right? Just like Wix and Squarespace did with websites. Like, but there are now more web designers and more developers than there ever were before. It's just all of them are good. And so I'm of the same opinion, but I wanna allow you to touch a little bit on the fact that, really if you put yourself in the position of 2013 Jay saying, hey, we're gonna pivot to online, then learning that 9 years later there's an AI that can come out that can write newspaper articles about seemingly anything. How did you create a culture in those 9 years so that people actually wanted to use the AIs and
Mm.
thought of it as their teammate instead of their competition? So I think that's where there's so much
Yeah.
value.
And I think like I can speak to it to journalism in particular, but I think it applies to most applications, right? Um, I think it's about understanding. This is where when I said I think AI is at peak, this is a great object lesson in what I mean by that. From the outside, if you're not a journalist or you don't, you don't understand what it means to produce trustworthy local journalism. It appears that an AI can just write a newspaper article about seemingly anything. And why do we even need journalists? Because we'll just trust the computer to do that. Well, you and I know this from experience that that's not the case at all. AI can, right now, at least AI can, pretty reliably take in information or seek out information and then wrap language around it or create. Now it can do things like create interesting infographics or code blocks around that can make the article richer and can help you create lead art if you don't have that lead art. But at the end of the day, the executive level function of deciding what's important and where and what your readers need to know about and analyzing what your readers are telling you that they need and thinking through this kind of higher level executive function. What it does, like what we find is that AI allows people to spend more time in higher level executive thinking and less time on scut work that is just as necessary, right? You need to be able to, if you're going to provide comprehensive high school sports reporting, you need to be able to try to be comprehensive. You can't say comprehensive and cover 5% of the games or the teams. That's not comprehensive. But it's impossible to do that anymore. Like there's no newsroom on earth that can do that with people alone. Um, I just like, I think that it's the overestimation of the utopian future that gets in our way of effectively deploying this because we want to move from where we are right now to 100% utopian future. And the reality is that that's going to take time. And if we ever, and the utopian future is just going to keep moving. The goalpost is just going to keep, like, there will always be a gap between where we are and where we might want to go, depending on whatever industry that we're in. The important thing to focus on is, and I'm using the term that Dan Sullivan came up with, is to focus on the game. Like, where were we a year ago and where are we today? And like where we are today is like simple tools wherein you don't think that you can just use simple forms and simple user generated input to free an editor from 8 to 12 hours of work formatting obituaries to run on a local news site. But that's what we did. That was a focus point that we wanted. We wanted to free a staff member to be able to focus on the higher order things and then give, put the right checks in place, but allow the users to generate that content for us so that we could focus on reporting. And it worked out beautifully. It's all about the deployment side of it.
Yeah, one of the things, because I hear complaints every once in a while that, what AI promised or what automation or some of these tech tools have promised and what they've delivered are two completely different things. And in a lot of cases, I think that they're right. Like I had agreed that we're kind of at the peak here. But also there are a lot of use cases where it couldn't be more wrong, just that what became normal so quickly is this massive improvement in productivity, this massive reduction in irritation. And so what I'll say to people is I'll say like, okay, go back and do it the old way. Like take one of these things that we've used AI for, do it the old way one time. And then I promise you, you'll never want to do that again.
This is yeah, perfect. Exactly. I mean, I'm a liberal arts major, Kevin. I have scratched and clawed my way into a C- level of Excel competence over the course of an entire career. But I'm unable to do high level cash flow analysis. I just don't know how to do that using those tools. But I can get a pretty good cash flow analysis of a financial statement by asking ChatGPT to help me do that. And I think that that's only going to get better. I don't see that kind of like decision tree stuff where you're able to say, hey, I want you to help me understand where my strengths and weaknesses are here. I don't see that getting any worse. I see it only advancing and getting better. And in my case, that helps me be a better leader. It helps me be a better manager. It helps me act more quickly on trends that would have normally taken me months to uncover. I 100% agree with you. When you look at the alternative, it's helpful. Like you're aiming, look at the alternative, look at the way you did it before and tell me that, sure, it's not perfect, but tell me this isn't better.
Yeah. Tell me that your irritation every day has gone up thanks to using these tools to save you time and energy and effort. I was speaking at a payroll conference a month or two ago, and I showed on stage in real time how you could use ChatGPT to reconcile to direct deposit report, like to payroll report. And, the previous way of doing this is you take the two files, you print them out, and then you go by one by hand, like with a paper and pen to make sure that all the numbers match. Right. And it's like, yeah, I get that, there's a little bit of over promising and under delivering, especially with demos, especially with GPT for recipes. Right. But there are also a lot of things that are way better than they were back in 2022.
I think, like not to bring up a sore subject with lots of people, but when you saw when COVID-19 was happening and the vaccines were being developed and what we were seeing was science happening live and in real time with a camera on it 24/7. All of these mistakes around the vaccines and the disease and the way the disease would work and who it would affect, all of these things would have happened in a lab that no one would have known about because they happen every day. You try a thing, it doesn't work. That's added to the knowledge set and it refines the next thing that you do. But it was happening all in public, right? And so, lives were at stake. People were getting sick. They were dying. People were confused. We were in the middle of this massive year-long breaking news story that happened every single day. I think that's what's happening sort of with generative AI right now. I mean, yeah, so Google told you to put glue on your cheese pizza. Yes. Right? I mean, everyone should eat a rock every day. I mean, like, these are great, right? But the thing, they make fun headlines, and they make great Twitter memes and stuff. The thing that I find though is, like, when you think about those one-off situations and you look at the fact that, okay, this is a technology that's being developed in real time in front of millions and millions and millions of people. What about the other 99.8% of the time that it really saved people a lot of time and energy, and it made just like it was super easy? I think but it's not as fun to focus on the success sometimes, or it's like, that's a little more boring than glue on pizza. This is where I'm like, the development of these tools is inevitable. The deployment of them is everything in terms of how successful businesses are going to be, or how quickly they're going to fail. I mean,
So let's talk about how some of the things that you've done. So I want to pivot directions a little bit to automating the release of Obit, the publishing of Obit. Very critically, not automating predicting who's going to die, the publishing of the obits, because I think this is such a low-hanging fruit opportunity that was executed perfectly among everybody on the team. So do you mind doing me a favor here? Tell me about what and what was the process before, who was doing it?
sure.
And then what is the process now, who is doing it? And then what we'll do after those two things is we'll dive into, what did it take to make that a reality?
So, like, in the before was, and this is maybe unique to Ohio, I'm not sure. But the before was 95% of all obituaries are sent to a newspaper on behalf of the bereaved through the funeral home that's managing the services. So that was, and in our case, and in many cases, those obituaries are emailed as a Word document or an attachment, or sometimes in the body of an email, from a person at the funeral home to usually a role-based email at the news organization. The action that would then trigger is that a person at the role-based, or the person at the news organization, has to get the email, open the attachment. There's usually two attachments, generally a photo and the obituary. Copy and paste that from Word or whatever into the CMS that they're using, create the asset, write the headline, make sure that the links are correct, then do the same thing with the image, write the caption, and then publish, right? And then in like, we serve an audience of about like, our region has about 250,000 people. On any given day, we can receive anywhere from 8 to 20 different obituaries from funeral homes. So you take that workflow and you multiply it by 8 or 20 every single day, at least 5 days a week, but also on the weekends. So this was taking up a human being's time to do this. All of this over and over and over and over again.
How many do you think you got in a week, or you get in a week?
I don't know. I mean, sometimes again, depending on the week, depending on the situation, but anywhere between 50 and 75 on average per week across, all of the pins.
And it's like 15 to 20 minutes per obit?
Probably reasonable. So you do the math on this.
Yeah.
So we had a couple different concerns. The first one was, this is the last time that person is likely to ever be in a newspaper. This is the first or second single most important milestone in their life, depending on how you view their birth. Like, I mean, birth and death, these are big bookends, right, in a person's life, right? So it's really important that you view this content with some care, and that you have, a certain degree of respect that moves through this process. There are people that are sad because this person has passed away. So treating this with any level of cavalierness is not appropriate either. They're not selling a car. They're like memorializing their person that they care about. But we knew that it really wasn't feasible for us to continue to offer this service to the community. And we don't charge for obituaries either. And I think this is notable. We offer it as a service to the community, and it also is a very well-read section of the paper. So there's a lot of value to it, to the community. So what we wanted to do was create an environment where we put the power back into the hands of the funeral homes, which were writing the obituaries and collecting the photographs and doing the things. We wanted to create an easier interface for them. So to cut to the chase, what we did was we worked with your company to build a form-based system that was easy to access. It allowed for the funeral home to input the information that they would have normally attached to an email, tell us what they wanted the headline to be, do some accuracy and grammar checks on all of that throughout the process, attach the image, and send that to us. And what it did was you guys helped us connect all of that information directly into our CMS. So the asset is automatically created. It's created in draft form, although we could automatically publish it. It's created in draft form. It allows for a human being to review it before it publishes, just to make sure that everything is as it should be, and then clicks publish. So it's cut down the amount of time spent managing that section by 90%. Thus,
if not more, 15 to 20 minutes down to what, 12
Yeah.
seconds? Most obits are 7 sentences.
Yeah. The funeral homes are fine with it. It's made it easier for that 5 to 10% of obituaries that are submitted by individual family members to submit those obituaries to us. It's an easy process for them to go through. I think it's notable that one of the notable risks of automating something like this is a reasonable question. Will some troll or crank try to fake someone's death and publish an obituary that is not accurate, blah, 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 blah. We've been doing this for 2.5 or 3 years now. It just doesn't happen. People are more good than we give them credit for on the balance. It's not to say that it won't happen someday and that that couldn't possibly happen, but that's the reality is, the fears are sometimes overblown around the bad things that people are going to do. But it's just been one of those situations where, again, it's not development, it's deployment. We took some tools and we deployed them very thoughtfully in the service of our readers and our newsrooms so that we could do more capital J journalism or accountability reporting, but while still giving readers the information that they very clearly want to know about, which is, who has passed from us this week.
Yeah. And I think one of the big things there that's underrated about the entire process, obviously it's a huge time savings. Obviously it's absolutely enormous. In terms of the productivity increase for both the newsroom and for the funeral home. But the other thing that I think is really important is if you put yourself in the position of the family that's like submitting it on their own, for example, now format to follow, like they have structure to follow. They're not making this up, going to somebody else's obit to try to figure out what do I need to put in mine. All of a sudden now you've got it all taken care of for you. And so, it was one of those examples, I think, of something that was such a piece of low hanging fruit, but my goodness, is it making a huge difference?
Yeah, it makes a big difference. The staff appreciates it. The clients appreciate it. Everybody wins here. And we will probably do the same thing in 2025 with press releases and the kind of business briefs that people send us all the time, which is, the plan is to build a user portal for those that we leverage the latest, kind of the latest developments with Gen AI and others to make those into assets that are categorized properly, that we can, that we can publish easily, add to emails easily. And again, reduce the time and effort in publishing those so that we can pay more attention to the growth and mentorship of the staff that we have. I'm not going to double the size of my staff so that we can do more growth and mentorship while we do a bunch of inefficient stuff that sucks up time that we could be better used for other things. We're going to use the technology to create the space for it. And in our world, there's this, like, we try to think of it like there's reporting and journalism, and then there's community information. And AI really excels in the space of helping develop and prep and publish summit. And then by doing that, it increases the value proposition for the newsroom, and it frees up time for the journalists to do the kinds of reporting that only journalists do. It's just, again, deployment.
It's the exact right approach. Nobody goes to journalism school so they can learn how to publish a press release.
Absolutely no one likes doing that. Like,
Right.
Zero number, the number is zero of the people on my staff, and anybody I ever talked to just loves publishing the news about, the bank vice president being promoted. But people actually do like being in the newspaper. When they've been promoted, it's appreciated that they're in the paper. So this is the place that bridges the gap, right? It serves the audience and the newsroom at the same time.
My last question for you here is, what do you know now that you wish you had known back in 2018, 2017, when you were really going headlong into this?
I think through some really hard lessons over the time that we've been working with this, I wish I had known how powerful the resistance would be inside of legacy organizations to obvious technologies that would be helpful to them. I just made a fail early on, and I think the exact same failed probably in different contexts, about how fast people would be, about how quickly people would see benefits of this, of smart use of this technology, and how I just completely underestimated the power of a corporate immune system to resist change. Had I had a feeling or a visceral understanding of how powerful that immune system would be, I probably would have made different decisions around the concentration of the effort and capital that we put into different projects. And I might have concentrated that more on developing things only for our use, where we could control it, where the immune system was like, yeah, give me more of that. No, fake. I think I would have built a coalition of the willing, rather than trying to convince people or show them the value of something that, even if they sort of knew in their brain was valuable, they just couldn't bring themselves to act on or implement. I didn't grow up in corporate culture, so I didn't know how slow it could move and how much friction there was in there to implementing sometimes relatively simple changes. So I know that now, and it affects my thinking and my decision making now around, like, where we put effort and who we put effort into, who we choose to work with, who we choose not to work with, just based on what we're seeing.
For sure.
Well, I was naive, very naive.
Well, everybody was back in 2017, 2018. Nobody knew how, especially, you bring the way that I talk about it is like we were bringing a machine gun to a knife fight. Mm-hmm. And, not everybody wants the technology as you can display it, or, sometimes people want it, but they don't have the authority to be able to make the decisions or the capability at the time.
Yeah, I don't bear any ill will. It's just sort of understanding, like, the world is operating in has a big determining factor on how they operate.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Thanks for having me.
Well,
Cool.
thanks,
I'm
Jay.
glad we got to catch up.
It was fun.